The purpose of this panel is to affirm our time horizon and think longer term about our portfolios. The world's kind of crazy right now. Chaos abounds every direction that we look. The best we can do to manage that is withdraw from the headlines and think longer term about our money and about our life. So I'm gonna go down the line. Mark, I'd like to start with you. If you could speculate the ideal portfolio performance, like what would be in it right now that you would be pretty comfortable is gonna be okay or up in 2030? As diversified as you want to take it.
If I had to buy it now and let it sit for 6 years, whatever. First of all, long-term perspective, that's the way that we make money. Charlie Munger said the big money is not made in the buying and the selling, but in the waiting. So you got to wait for the right opportunity, and then you have to wait for it to develop. So that's the right outlook. So 2030. I project that this decade will be inflation. I'm an inflation bull for the decade, driven by deglobalization, or as I call it, decentralization. I think we continue to have a loss of trust, and so we continue to see the end of the international monetary order, or the fiat system as we know it, and that's sort of a shift back to hard assets. So I think we're having a commodity bull run. I think we see a loss of trust, and I see lots of inflation, and lots of money printing, and lots of debt addition. So the portfolio for me would be one, commodities. So I like those. I like energy intensive commodities. Yes, I like gold. The other commodity I like the best, of course, is Bitcoin. So for me, it's going to be probably way over allocation to Bitcoin for most people. A little bit of gold. I think gold is probably the interim step that central banks try to go to restore a little bit of trust in the currency. And that's sort of this interim step. So I think that's probably good for the next couple of years, so we'll put a little bit of that in there. The COP28 just met a few weeks ago, and they went from wind and solar to now nuclear is our #1 initiative. We want to triple the amount of nuclear, so of course uranium is going to make a big percentage of that as well. And then I think energy, right? So no matter how much wind and solar they want to pump down our throats, and now we add uranium, we're still going to need oil and gas. So we're going to go with probably a huge allocation towards Bitcoin, because it's a more scarce asset. It's very energy intensive. We're gonna put a little bit of gold in there for that little pump. We're gonna put some energy plays, oil and gas, and some uranium.
Quick break here, guys. Today's episode is brought to you by Copernico Metals. Now, regular viewers of my channel will be familiar with the entrepreneur behind Copernico. His name is Ivan Bebek. Now, although a young man in this business, Ivan's already created tremendous value for his shareholders in the past, namely with Caden Resources, which he sold to Agnico Eagle, and Keegan Resources, which became a mine now owned by Galiano Gold. Now, Ivan has surrounded himself with expertise from BHP, Newmont, and Barrick on his board at Copernico Metals. Check out copernicometals.com. Now back to the interview. I know you're a big real estate investor as well, Mark. Real estate factor into that portfolio?
Yeah. So real estate, I use that for offsetting taxes. I also use it for cash flow, and I also like cool places. So real estate is a good place for that. So certainly that makes up a pretty big chunk of my portfolio. Again, back to scarce assets. If we just kind of break this down real quickly, I'm an inflation bull. So I think the problem that most of us are going to have is we're not going to be long enough for what's coming over the next couple of years for the rest of the decade. And so in order to not just keep up with inflation, the S&P does really good with that. But in order to beat inflation, we need to be in scarce assets. So those would be fine art, collectibles, things like that. Bitcoin, of course, is very scarce, energy intensive, but also real estate. But not just real estate. Real estate's a perfect proxy for inflation, but beachfront, waterfront, lakefront property. So certainly I have some waterfront property that I'm working on, so we'll be adding that as well.
The antithesis of inflation, anything that can't be created easily. That's the play. All right, Grant, over to you.
Like Mark, I think inflation is going to be the problem we have to mitigate in the next 6 years now, 7 years now. So I can't argue with much of that. I wouldn't have as big an allocation to Bitcoin, obviously, but I would take some of that Bitcoin, and I talked about this a couple of times recently. Japan. I think Japan is going to be a place where you can make some really, really good money in the next few years. It's been off everybody's radar for 25 years. I'm biased because I began my career in Japan in the mid-1980s when it was the hottest market on earth. And it's been in pretty much a bear market for the last 25 years. And so it's amazing that the world's third or fourth largest economy is just off everybody's radar, but it has been. And for good reason. There's been nothing to get excited about in Japan, but very slowly, over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, there's been an incredible shift in corporate governance. The companies down there have been forced to get their balance sheets in pristine condition. I mean, you go down to Japan, you can find world-class companies trading below book values, single-digit PEs, returning money to shareholders, better corporate governance. It's extraordinary. And I think Japan is going to be a really good market. We've got the Nikkei finally approaching, finally ready to take out its all-time highs, which it made in 1989. So that just shows you, when you think how many new all-time highs the US stock market, for example, has made, Japan hasn't made one since 1989. So I think Japan is something that a lot of people are going to look at. I think the real estate component is important if you have it already, but I wouldn't want to be buying it now to put away for the next 7 years. I think commercial real estate particularly is going to come under a lot of pressure in the next 2 or 3 years. I think there'll be a great opportunity, but it's not yet. I think the housing market similarly. I think prices haven't corrected to reflect the increase in mortgage costs, and if the Fed can't lower rates and keep them down, then I think the people who've been hanging on and dipping into their savings to pay their heightened mortgage payments are going to cry uncle, and I think we'll see another fall in the housing market. But other than that, gold, I agree with. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of owning gold in the portfolio. Energy, I think, is not going anywhere anytime soon. I think the green agenda is beginning to fade pretty quickly now. And I think people are starting to realize that we cannot survive without fossil fuels. It's a great idea to be green, but mandating we're going to be green by 2030 is just a pipe dream. So that'd be my big shift from what Mark said. I wouldn't have as much allocated to Bitcoin. I'd probably have a bit just for fun, just because it'll shut people like Mark up from trying to convert me. So I'd have a bigger allocation to gold. But otherwise, yeah, I think everything you said, I would agree with 100%.
Gold, energy, and Grant,
Japan. Don't forget Japan.
Gold, energy, and Japan. Could I get you to drill in just a little bit to the energy component? Whereabouts are you looking exactly?
I just want to own exposure to natural gas and oil. And some of it's going to be the midstream companies. There's some terrific midstream companies, and a lot of that might be, MLPs are, I think at some point will be a good buy. Not right now, but I think MLPs will be a good thing to buy. But I just want exposure to that because I think there's going to be a U-turn, and I think people are going to start opening up drilling rather than closing it down.
And complete agreement on the inflation thesis, sounds like.
That's the problem. That's the biggest problem I feel I'm going to have to face.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but that's where my focus is.
No, okay. Awesome. Thank you, Grant.